Okay, back to day two of the chaos. I apologize, sir. It was not chaos. It's been a packed morning.
I'm sure it was smooth, Jim.
It was a let's go with smooth.
Yes.
Yes, sir. You saved me from myself. Our next speaker, obviously, is the USAF AQ, affectionately Secretary Air Force Acquisition. Obviously, he's the military deputy, and what this is intended to do. We had General Nahom briefed yesterday morning. How do I say this? He was the teaser that set the stage for the chief. Of course, General Brown was very forceful about, hey, I've got problems with a 7th Fleet aircraft. I want to chop it down to 4, the 4+1. The importance of shifting the ISR portfolio to where he needs it to be penetrating, and of course the importance of GBSD. The briefer this morning, of course, General Richardson is going to explain how to take the combat priorities from the chief and how to take the resourcing that we talked about from General Nahom and actually how to turn that into combat power. Please welcome Duke Richardson. Yes, sir. Was that good?
You gave my briefing.
Yes, sir.
So thank you. Yeah. So what I really want to focus on today is really exactly what Jim said. I want to really focus on the how part, not the what, not the why. So I think between General Brown and General Nahom, you've already got kind of the picture of where we're headed. Hopefully, you're also getting an insight on the space capabilities as well from General Raymond and his team.
Sir.
So.
And he did make 2 points yesterday. He did indicate that he's making good progress on a space-based GIMT.
Yep.
To support your AVMS requirements. And also he did lean in hard on the need for tactical ISR capability.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, so that's what it's about. How do we take those force designs and turn them into reality? So that's what today's about. So I don't know, there we go. So the topic for what I'd like to address today is about digital acquisition. This is a term that we've been using a lot, and for some folks it's probably abstract. And so what I'd like to do is try to bring it alive a little bit today and tell you why it's so important to the Department of the Air Force. There's a lot of opportunities here. If you're a lot of folks out there saying, hey, there's really nothing new here. I've had a computer in my desk since the mid 80s. What's exactly new? That's all true. So this is not about using computers necessarily, okay? It's not about digitizing paper into PDF files. It could be, it's partly that, if that's, but that would be sort of like the most roughest way that we would do this. It's also not about digitizing current processes. It could be that, but it's much more than that. When this is really realized to its fullest extent, it's actually one more step, and that last step is when we can actually use these tools, these techniques, to change the processes, to do things completely differently, to do things collaboratively, government and industry, and not just the primes, but their suppliers, all the way down the line. And not just in the same location or even the same state or the same time zone. So think about a geo-agnostic way of doing things, asynchronous or synchronous. These tools allow us really to have a single truth source that everyone is operating from. So really that is the key here. Yes, computers have been around a long time, but the techniques that we're going to discuss here have really matured over time. Even this idea of digital engineering is really not that new. So that traces back almost 20 years. But it's really matured to a point where commercial industry has grabbed onto this in a huge way. I will tell you, DoD is slow to the party. We're slow to the party, Jim. We are now, I think, catching up. The Air Force obviously isn't the only one that's embracing this. I think if you went to the other services, they would be doing the same thing. If you went to talk to Ms. Cummings, she's all about this as well. And so that's what I want to talk about today. We often think of, at least I think of acquisition kind of in 4 phases. The first phase is the deciding what you want to buy and then funding it. That takes years. In the case of B-52 re-engineering, it took almost a decade, quite honestly. That first phase, and by the way, I do view that as the first phase of acquisition. It's an extremely slow phase. It doesn't really involve me that much. The next one is getting what we want, getting approved through the milestone process, and then going through either a source selection or a sole source sort of a negotiation. That second phase can also take a long time. What we've got now is a great tool that we sometimes apply called Section 804, middle tier of acquisition. Middle tier of acquisition, the reason the services like it is it allows us to get through those first 2 phases extremely quickly. And you know, really, probably the 2 big things is it doesn't require a JSID's validated requirements document. The other thing that it doesn't require is a milestone decision process, which would include all the probably 18 inches of documentation that goes with that. So we're using that pretty heavily. But really, even that, as good as it is, really just gets us started quickly. It doesn't get us through these next 2 phases. The next 2 phases are executing the acquisition physics part, actually executing the program, getting through the design process, the test process, the certification process, the production process, and then the fielding process. That's phase 3. What I'm talking about today, we believe, is our anecdote for getting through that quickly. The 4th phase, of course, is product support. This one also gets after that one. So probably the big takeaway is digital acquisition is going to allow us to get through those 2 phases, the last 2 phases quickly. And I think when we marry it up with Section 804, not just Section 804, but also tailoring the acquisition pathways, we got a pretty good set of tools. This applies to air systems, space systems, really any system. So it's not unique in that regard. What I really like about it is I would consider this field level ACRIFORM. This isn't DC ACRIFORM. This is really field level. These are things that the field is going to be using and is using in some cases already. And it works. I'm not going to go through a lot of the commercial examples, but trust me, it works. We don't really have a choice. And if you say, prove it, I'll say just go look at the commercial literature. It's already out there. And so that's kind of the topic. I'll race through a little bit of tutorial a little bit, and then we'll get to some of the challenges at the very end. So we'll talk about some of the commercial advancements that have made this possible. I'd like to give a few definitions. I'll talk a little bit about the tools. I tend to be a guy who thinks in concrete terms, not much less in the abstract, so I do actually want to spend a few minutes about the types of software tools that will now allow this to happen. And then I'll talk about the benefits as to why this is big that extend across the life cycle. So we'll go to the next chart. And this gets into, there we go. So what is it that's allowing this to happen? So if you kind of look at the commercial advancements in the commercial world, you'll quickly see that some interesting things are happening. We've got, and I'm not sure how legible these curves are, but the blue one that's going up pretty linearly is a plot of processing power over time. So you can see basically a 10,000-fold increase in computing power in the last 20 years. Yes, we've had computers for a while, but not like the ones we got today. Much more powerful. The red curve that's declining, that shows the cost of storage, cloud storage. And so you can kind of see that it's gone down 3,000-fold in that same time frame. So think about this. So I don't know how many of you have a desktop computer at home, but if you do, I'll bet you haven't turned it on much lately, because even at home we tend to use cloud storage. All the tools that I'm going to talk about are going to require those cloud techniques. The third one on here is just the exponential growth in data in the last 20 years. And so it becomes an exercise of, if you take those 3 factors, it really does drive a new set of methods, and the commercial world is grabbed onto that. What we're doing in the Department of the Air Force is you'll hear about Cloud One. That is our cloud. Think of that as a term and it's not just a single vendor. So it's not just Amazon, for example. Cloud One is our cloud. Our cloud could be provided by many providers. So the other one in the cloud section is called Platform One. That is a development environment. That's a government-owned development environment. We call it the tech stack that we're using, and also a lot of our industry partners are now using. So this is a very new model. So you think about the GBSD program. GBSD is doing its development in the government-owned Platform One. So you imagine government and industry working together in the same development environment. It's a very powerful concept. One level below that, I talk about all those tools, and I'll have a separate chart on the tools that allow a lot of this to happen. But the bumper sticker really grabs it. The government and industry team working together, synchronously and asynchronously, using digital tools that enable one truth source. We're not shooting emails around. We're not sending procedural data packs in the mail. We're collaborating at speed, and that's really what's different about this. Is we're able to do stuff simultaneous now, multiple activities at the same time. A few definitions. We call these three things the digital trinity. I'm sure you've probably read some of the papers that we put out. The first topic there is digital engineering. That's the idea of using these software tools and the cloud and the collaboration tools to create a virtual model that replicates in near perfection a physical thing. And if we can get that digital model or set of digital models precise, then there's a lot of things that we can do virtually, like test and certification, that we don't actually have to do in the real world. Agile software, that's another topic. That's the second one that makes up the Trinity. And that is about DevSecOps, new methods for developing software. All that stuff would also ride on that Platform One environment. So it's the same exact environment for Agile software that we're using for the digital engineering. The third piece is open systems architectures. That's another thing that's evolved. You'll hear oftentimes this term government reference architecture. And that's really what that allows us to do is set up a government control of the interfaces to some level. For some systems, we may not control that down to a very low level. For other systems, we would control it at a much deeper level, even down to the box level. And so what that allows us, I'll talk about a little bit what that allows us to do later. But all three of these things are, it's a team, it's a collaborative approach between government and industry. So what about the tools? Remember I talked about these new software tools that exist? One thing I don't want to do today is suggest that these are the Department of the Air Force approved tools. The labels that you see there, they're just there to make the chart look neat, okay? What I really want to say is the tools kind of come into 5 categories. The first one is you need a model-based systems engineering tool to build that architecture, to flow down the requirements. Back in the day, we would do systems engineering, the classic V, where we would, maybe General Brown would give me 3 requirements. He'd say, hey, I want the new here's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about persistence, lethality, and survivability. That's what I'm worried about. And here's where I want those 3 attributes to be important. That's what he might say. Okay, Chief, got it. Back in the day, he might go much deeper than that. And then we would allocate those requirements down into system level, subsystem, down to the box. No kidding, down to the card inside the box. So I'm marching myself down the V on the systems engineering curve. We call that allocating the requirements down to the lowest level. Everyone's familiar with the preliminary design review, the CDR, working all the way down. And then once we get to the bottom of that V, we start marching back up. We test the card to make sure it meets the requirements that were allocated to the card: size, weight, power, inputs, outputs. We check the box, we check the subsystem, we check the system, then eventually at the very end of the V, all the way to the right, we would put it into operational test. What I've just described is the way we've been doing this for decades. It's serial, it's manual, it requires a lot of paper products. It does require modeling. I'm not going to suggest that we haven't been using models. But model-based systems engineering is very, very different. All that stuff that I just described is done using these tools. One of the tools is called Cameo. That really is just a systems modeler. It's not the only one. What's important, so if you're a competitor to Cameo, please don't email me. It's just the icon I grabbed. Really what they all do that's important to the Department of the Air Force is they use the SysML modeling language. So if they use the SysML modeling language, we are happy and we're interested. If they don't, we are not happy, we're not interested. So we're not going to mandate the tool that's used, we're only going to mandate the modeling language. That's important because as we train the government team to work alongside industry, we have to speak from the same language. Very important. Another tool on the upper left is this idea of a product lifecycle management tool. In this case, the Air Force has selected Team Center. And so if you can imagine a structure for housing all the data, drawings, supply provisioning data, the model outputs, the fact that we've met all the requirements, everything is held in this Team Center. So I'm actually an engineer. An engineer thinks the model-based systems engineering tool is the quarterback. I'm an engineer. I actually think the PLM tool is the quarterback because it's housing all the data. And that PLM tool has the ability to springboard and get the one truth from these other tools. So it's not trying to replicate the model. It will go out to Cameo and grab the latest instantiation of the model as that design changes. We do actually have 3D drawing tools that we need. One example is CATIA. Again, not that that's the only one. We have analysis tools that we would use also. And then, of course, we have a modeling tool to get system level performance that we call AFSIM. So these tools work together. If you can imagine, they work together to create a digital twin of a real world physical system. And that allows us to really draw a digital thread through the entire weapon system lifecycle, and extremely powerful. The more we can do in these tools before we've bent any metal, the better off we're going to be. So what are the benefits? The benefits there's actually quite a few benefits. In development, this is a whole paper. I'll just give a couple examples in each of these categories. In design and development, it allows you to do continuous collaborative design and design reviews. So future PDRs and CDRs aren't going to be discrete events. They're actually happening every day because the government and industry team are in the tools looking at the design every day. It also allows you to optimize the entire design, structures, systems, maintenance, heavy maintenance, all those things simultaneously without regret. If I can simultaneously design the structure along with the mission systems and the wiring that goes in it and adjust both as I go, I don't build a structure and then try to figure out, oh crap, we got to fix this. How do we fix it now that the structure's solid? So really huge. In the case of GBSD, billions of virtual designs so we can do cost performance trade-offs. Design is huge. Test and cert, I kind of mentioned that already. The real idea there is if we can get to a performance model that we trust and it's validated, we can now start not doing test points in flight. So we've always done this. We've always validated performance either through analysis, through inspection, through ground tests, or through flight test. So we will always do those 4 ways of verifying performance up that V curve on the right. What's different now, though, is we want to move more of the test points out of the flight test and the ground test into the analysis bucket. Huge opportunity there. I will tell you, truth in lending, I think this is the area where we have some work to do in digital acquisition. We need to realize more of the benefit in test and certification. Production, lots of stuff going on. What these techniques allow you to do is, what I would say is distribute production. So instead of, if you want to go watch I won't say a platform, but if you want to go watch a platform be made, you used to go to that facility and you basically watch it be made from the ground up. It doesn't have to be that way. We can actually distribute a lot of the subsystem production and stuffing in other locations, which then, oh, by the way, allows us to expand the industrial base. So you don't have to have this huge capital investment in order to be a supplier anymore. So distributed, collaborative, geo-agnostic, vendor-agnostic production. That's a lot of qualifiers there, but it really does change production quite a bit. It expands the sources that we can use. I think it will actually expand the DIB, which is good for us, and brings new players in to bring some new ideas in. What's really cool about production is, in the design phase, not only will we design it, but we will actually produce it using the digital tools. So we will, once we know what all the parts are, we will practice designing it using different sequences of putting the parts together. Imagine a piece of furniture from IKEA, until we find the most efficient way. And then we will build the first unit. So imagine ramping down the production curve the learning curve much faster than in the past. So when you build the 100th unit, the first unit is like building the 100th unit. So that's very exciting. Product support, I mentioned the PLM tool. That is really the power for product support. So imagine all the support data, all the drawings in there in perpetuity. So if I have an A10, I'm not trying to recreate the drawings because Fairchild went out of business. I've got the drawings already. They're in the PLM tool. If I need to look for an alternative source of supply because I have a DMS issue, guess what? I've got all the architecture data in the PLM tool as well as the provisioning data that I would need to do that. So that, again, also allows us to get new accesses to sources of supply. And then in modernization, because the open systems architecture that I mentioned, I now have the ability to keep competition alive during the modernization phase. And so hopefully you've tracked all that, but the real thing here that I'm trying to present is that there are benefits all around this circle, not just in the design phase. It's not just about model-based systems engineering, which is probably why I like the PLM tool the most. All right, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. What you can expect from the Department of the Air Force going forward is you'll kind of see, we'll use 3 terms a lot. You'll see us talking about conventional programs. That's the traditional model. That's going down the V and back up the V using that manual serial. I'm not going to say it's not collaborative, but it's not collaborative at the same time approach. We will still do some of that. We just will. And some parts of some of our programs will do that method. We'll also call some programs ePrograms. I think you've seen the ET7 has been given that name. That's a program that is fully embracing the digital trinity as I've described it today, all three elements. That is an eProgram, and so we're hoping, we put out guidance, Ms. Costello, the Service Acquisition Executive, has put out guidance on what it takes to become an eProgram. We're hoping that people, because we all like that little trinket, would want to, and we are seeing that. Programs want to be known as ePrograms. I'm seeing it both on the government side and also with industry. When industry, they're very much, we're doing this for our nation. We're not doing this for money. So people want to be called ePrograms. They see the value in being able to say that they're an eProgram. She holds that authority at her level. Unfortunately, you don't just get to call yourself an eProgram. You're going to have to pass a few tests first. There's another variant called the E-Series program. I know you've heard about that a little bit in the past. This is really just an eProgram where we upfront put it on a replication cadence that's much shorter than 30 years. So really an E-Series program, I mean, we've probably always done E-Series. It's just the periodicity of the series is like 30 years. We'd like to bring that way back much sooner, and that really does change a lot of things. There's a lot of folks that get excited about the E-Series. We're not envisioning applying this to everything, if that's a concern. We would only apply it when we think technology is turning over faster, such that we're not able to counter the threat. We would look for something like that. We would look at an E-Series approach to make sure that we can keep up with the threat. So think about an E-program. GBSD is another great example of an E-program. NGAD is an example of an E-Series program. Okay, so that's a great example of that. Conventional program, we all know what those are. There's actually an intersection between conventional and E-program, though. So think about F-15EX. Parts of that program are actually an E-program, not the whole thing. So there's a sort of an overlap in the Venn diagram there, where things like A-10 re-wing is in that bucket, F-15EX, B-52 commercial engine re-engineering program is in that bucket. So we've got kind of a mix going on. At least that gives you a good idea for the spectrum. This is from a paper that Dr. Ropa had written that I think has been published. I'm sure most folks have seen it. A lot of detail on this chart. I've got the yellow light, so I won't be able to completely brief it. But basically, it kind of shows we did a business case on a conventional approach, an E-program approach, and an E-Series approach on what I'm going to consider an illustrative E-Series fighter program. The point of the chart is that you save money going from conventional to E-program. I've looked at this work very closely. I view it as conservative. So that 10% cost savings from conventional to E-program, I believe, is conservative. And so I think when Dr. Roper built this, he wanted to make sure that he was conservative about the assumptions that went into it. And then when you go to an E-Series program, it changes the game. Because you're not going to be flying the asset as long, you don't plan to modify it. The only mods would be safety-driven mods. And ONS is completely different. You're not doing heavy maintenance. You may never take it to an organic depot for heavy maintenance. You'd still do depot level repairs on the commodities and the mission systems, but not the actual system itself. And so we've seen in our systems that after a certain number of years, the ONS costs go up quite a bit. So that counteracts that. This really bucks the model of 70% of the costs are in ONS. So it's a very different model. And what's interesting about it is you'll see that it's really almost the same cost. And so why would you not look toward an approach like this? What's missing from this chart is the fact that we're increasing the capability of the aircraft. So it's not just that we're getting newer aircraft, but the capability, it's actually on there. It's called a performance index, a competition index. It's the yellow line on top. So we're actually getting fresher aircraft that are able to keep up with the fleet, the threat much better. So that's the idea there. This is my last chart. Am I still yellow over there, Jim?
You're good, sir.
Okay. So what are the challenges? Well, the first one is closing the business case. So, and by that I really mean in industry. And I think industry, I don't know that this is much of an issue anymore. I think industry is very much embracing these ideas. But we've all been on a journey together. Let's face it, both our industry partners and the Air Force very much has been on this journey together. I myself have been on this journey. But making sure that we close that business case. If we go to an E-Series approach, we've got to make sure that they can make money in design, development, and production. If we don't, then that puts us in a very bad spot. We really only have probably three vendors today that are capable of fighter production, and that's severely ramped down as compared to back in the day. So we want to make sure that business case closes for industry. Same thing on the protecting the intellectual property. So in the case of GBSD or something else, that government tech stack using Platform One, we've got to make sure that Platform One is not just secure from the adversary, but also is able to do the intellectual property protection. I mentioned the government reference architecture. At some point, the government will own that architecture down to a certain level of the interfaces. It might even be, it could be down to the card level, or it might stop at the LRU level, but it's going to stop somewhere. But wherever the government rights stop and the industry rights take over, we've got to make, and it's in that same tech stack, we have to make sure that we are able to protect it. That's still work that has to be done. Some programs are using the government tech stack and they're ePrograms. Other programs are not using the government tech stack and they're ePrograms. So it's one of those cases where it's probably going to depend on the exact circumstances. Organized, train, and equip. General Bunch and General J.T. Thompson are running two very large acquisition centers that have to make sure their workforce knows and understands these tools. We're working through that, and General Bunch has built a very large digital campaign to get after exactly this. How does he organize and train, equip the field workforce so that they can implement the SAE's plan for going forward on ACT strategies? That's a big job. I do not want to undersell it, and so we're working through our way through that. That challenge is ongoing right now. The last one is just creating that and sustaining that needed digital infrastructure. We have a tendency to like to build fighters and mobility aircraft and soft aircraft at the expense maybe of infrastructure. So we've got to be willing to make some tough choices. If this is the way we're going to do business, we've got to be willing to fund the infrastructure that enables that. I mentioned Cloud One, I mentioned Platform One, I mentioned the software tools. All that stuff has to be part of this, otherwise this breaks down. And so I think I am out of time. I hope you saw that I am very excited about this. I think this is a revolution in acquisition. I don't like to use the term act reform. I guess I did earlier, but this is something new. For the first time that I can remember, that I think is really going to change the game in those last two phases of acquisition that I mentioned. Yes, sir. And so we got to get after this. We've got to figure out how to turn our systems much faster. The chief said it best: accelerate, change, or lose. Yes, sir. I don't think that's just a bumper sticker. I think lose is actually a real option. So if we don't figure out how to accelerate, that's the path we're on. This is the way to do it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Well done. So we've still got at least 12 to 15 minutes for Q&A. Yep. If you plan permitting for you?
Yeah, I'm good. That's good.
Yes, sir. I'll follow you, sir. Go ahead. We affectionately know this as the mosh pit, sir.
Okay.
Hondo Garrison members, Q member Sam Adcock, forgive me, sir.
Well, it's very cozy in here.
He's co-moderating with us this morning.
Okay.
We've got a ton of people already lined up in the queue.
Okay.
Let's see. Forgive me, sir. I apologize. I think we've got a good 12 to 15 minutes.
Okay. Well, a lot of people want to talk to him, so.
Okay, so I will. Let me turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. First question would be Valerie Encina from Defense News. Valerie, do you have your computer off of mute?
I think so, hopefully. Thank you for having me in the mosh pit, and I hope you guys can hear me. So I wanted to ask about a specific program. I wanted to ask about Air Force One. Earlier this month, Boeing announced a charge on that program. It's involved in a legal dispute with one of its subcontractors who has fallen a year behind work. And my that Boeing recently put forward a program. So my question in general is, has the Air Force agreed, and what does that mean for the major milestones that are coming up? And then also separately, types of actions is considering in order to keep this program on track going forward?
So I think she was breaking up.
If I get it correctly,
okay.
Valerie, you came in garbled, but if I just basically status of PAR,
Right.
what's your reaction to it? Are you expecting any impact in terms of
Right.
the new schedule?
Yes.
And any other thoughts from that perspective as you see fit?
Right. Well, so that's a great question. I think we are definitely expecting an impact. The extent of it is not yet known. Boeing has been very good about communicating with us. We're going to try to, well, not try. We will stay out of this situation because that's an issue that they're having with a supplier. Obviously, on Air Force One, interiors is a very critical supplier. And so we've got to get that right. There's a lot of other parts of the program, Valerie, that we can keep going on and that we are doing. So there's a lot of structural work that's underway right now, on the two aircraft. So both aircraft are currently in mod. They were making good progress. This is definitely a setback. Boeing is working hard. They've got another supplier identified. We're going to transfer as much of the work on the interiors as possible. We've already made a lot of decisions on the interior, but there's a whole lot of work left to go. But I'm very confident in the transparency that Boeing is given us in terms of what happened and what they're doing to fix it. Boeing is not trying to back away from the firm fixed price contract that we have in place. We're going to obviously have to look at the schedule. We have to look at it pragmatically. I mean, it is what it is, right? So something happened. So we can't ignore that it didn't happen, and we can't, throw a temper tantrum and tell them to figure it out and get it delivered on schedule. So we will work with them. We'll do our part. We won't cut corners, though. So in the systems engineering stuff that I just described, now, by the way, that is not a digital acquisition program, but that whole process that I described about validating or verifying requirements, we will absolutely do. We won't cut any corners, as you can imagine. That aircraft will be ready to go when it fields.
Outstanding. Next question, Paul Ferraro, Raytheon Technologies. Paul, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Outstanding. Yes, sir. 4x4.
Fantastic. General, how are you today? Thank you so much for your comments and very, very insightful with regard to Air Force's priorities and how we as industry partners can prioritize our efforts and investments to that end. So thank you very much for that. I guess in keeping with the alignment of we as industry partners in the Air Force, can you share your vision on investment priorities, specifically as it relates to IRAD and CRAD, to support future research and development efforts in order to accelerate prototype development and speed those efforts toward acquisition of fielded capabilities?
Yeah, that's certainly a great question. I think if you're and I know that General Highnote talked earlier, right? So if you think about the area that we're focused on, the high-end fight, think about sensors, systems that would help us counter that. So really, I think the Department of the Air Force, both services are talking a lot about data right now, and so any IRAD that you can do in that area, I think is a winning strategy. We don't exactly, in my opinion, know entirely what that means, but we know it's important. And so it's not just about data. We want to be able to have access to it. We want to be able to trust it. We want to know that it's not tampered. We need to know that it's clean so that we can actually rely on it. Once we get that data set, I think we then start talking about things like artificial intelligence algorithms that allow us to do neat stuff with that data. So the whole idea of advanced battle management system continues to, I would say, mature in a great way. Having the Rapid Capabilities Office take over the material aspects of that, I think, are huge. By the way, ABMS is more than just the material aspect. So when you think about ABMS, think about the entire .mil PF line. And so we've got, we're working very closely with the A5 and the chiefs and the vice chiefs. That's the level that it's being worked at. The RCO is responsible for the material aspects of it. So the RCO is putting in a strategy to do what we call Capability Release 1, which I'm sure you're familiar with. That's really the first thing. But then even larger than that is infrastructure. So we've got to put in an infrastructure in place. And by infrastructure, I'm talking about secure computing, number one. Number two, the ability to move data, a network, using all those data attributes that we talked about, like security and throughput and all that. And the third thing is data management, Paul. So those three things. So anything that you can do, I think, to make you stand out in those three areas of infrastructure, I think is the world's going to open up to you. And so that's what the RCO is charged to do, is really build that infrastructure so that CR1 is not the last CR, and so that when we build CR2, it connects to CR1, and all the ground systems that are associated, and all the ops centers that are associated, or even my laptop that's sitting at a secure location is connected to it. So ABMS, I think, being focused on that is a smart play, and then making sure you embrace these digital ideas that I was talking about today, because we're not going to back off of them. And so I think the industry folks that embrace them are going to come out ahead. And hopefully that's given you some sense, Paul. But look at the 6 capabilities that comprise ABMS. I mentioned 3 of them, but you also know the others, things like sensor integration, effects integration, and applications. Pull those 6 things together and help us get connected so that idea of every sensor to every shooter actually means something, and it's not just a bumper sticker.
Very good. Thank you, Paul. Moving right along, Scott Baum, Elbit. Do we have Scott? All right, moving right along. Since we can't get Scott, if we'll keep you around. General Darrell Robertson, are you available? You're on mute if you're...
You want to jump to the next?
I guess we will.
Yes, sir. It's gone, to be honest, sir, it's gone flawlessly so far.
Do I get credit for each of these?
Of course,
that's 4 questions I've answered.
You're a guest in my house, so of course you get credit, sir. The only moment of near death that occurred, fatality occurred to us yesterday during the General Murray briefing.
Yeah.
We're mid-sentence, he disappeared.
Oh.
So we're kicking ass. We're
Okay.
doing well, sir.
Great.
No flaws today.
Moving on to another general, Charlie Coolidge, Airbus. General, it's good to see your name and your face. Charlie, you're on mute.
Well, I'm off mute.
There we go. We have you now.
Okay, good. Good to see you, Sam. Thank you, General, for answering our questions and for participating today. I'm looking at a pretty small program. Get your take on where this might go. Pilot Training Next is the larger program, but there's a lot of aspects to that. And one that I'm kind of interested in, as a number of other people are, is how you're going to do helicopter training in the future. Realizing that we can bring a lot of digital capability to this area. I just get your take on it. Realize that there's no formal program right now. They're just looking at alternatives. Thanks. Look forward to your answer.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great question. So whether it's helicopter training or fixed wing training, if you look at what's going on right now, and the F-35 is sort of a popular topic right now, it's not just the F-35. It's all of these high-performance fighters we have. They're very expensive to fly. And it's not just the fighters, it's all of these things. So the more, back to the, it's interesting, this digital acquisition idea. So the way I like to think about it is, we're in the acquisition community, we're using those tools to fight the acquisition war with industry. So they're fighting with us. The enemy is not industry. The enemy is the physics of getting something done that's brand new. So we're working together. Those tools are provided to us by Air Force Material Command and Space and Missile Systems Center. So in that odd way, Ms. Costello, the SAE, is like the COCOM, and General Bunch and General J.T. Thompson are the force providers. And same thing with ABMS. the COCOM, the COCOM in that case really is the COCOM, but Air Combat Command is and the other commands are the force providers. We've got to find a way, because those digital tools are so good now in the acquisition realm, they're also good for what General Coolidge is talking about. So we've got to get much more serious about simulation. And General Brown, I don't know if he talked about this when he was here, but he's very much about this. So these aircraft are always going to be expensive to fly. We're only going to pull so much out of that. But just like in digital acquisition, if I can move more performance verification from the real world into the virtual world, the better off I'm going to be. Exactly the same. If we can get good simulations that actually model the performance precisely, think about all that we can move from real world flying into simulators, as General Coolidge was talking about, both helicopters and fixed wings. What does that require? Well, it requires, in some cases, a very high threat environment. So it's not just being able to model the airplane. We've also got to be able to make sure that we can model the threat. And if you think about it, there's things that we can do in the simulator that we can never do in open air. And so, in terms of threat density. And so, I think it's a huge growth area that needs to be exploited heavily, both for helicopters and fixed wing. I think if we this might be a case where we've got to be kind of, we can't get there fast enough, in my opinion. So there's a lot of ground to be made here. We'll always obviously have physical systems, we have to, but the more the cost we can pull out of them, the better off we're going to be. So Charlie, I mean, there's a huge opportunity there, but the key is they've got to be authoritative in the virtual world. If they're not authoritative, both to the system that's being flown and the threat that they're facing, then they will not be adopted.
Great answer. Great answer. Moving on. Thank you, Charlie. Jason Probst, are you?
Hey, good afternoon, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. Apologies for the IT difficulties. Sir, thank you for the excellent brief today. One question on our mind is with the DoD's emphasis on greater emphasis on environmental programs and the carbon net zero strategies that we're seeing. Can you comment or provide your perspective on how we industry might begin to see greater emphasis in the area of procurements?
Of what? Of what?
In the context of acquisition, how does the environmental consideration and sustainment of
Right.
Alternative fuels, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I have not actually seen that concept show up in requirements yet, but that doesn't mean that they can't, what I call derived requirements. When I mentioned about walking down the V curve where we allocate requirements down, General Brown gives me 3. The acquisition committee will derive requirements from there. There's no reason to say that we can't derive requirements like that from there. Like, for example, General Brown doesn't say, hey, when you do the next fighter, can you make sure that somebody can eject safely from it?
Yes, sir.
He doesn't need to say that. We derive that requirement based on the mission that he's.
Yes, sir.
So same thing here. I think we need to start doing that. And I think industry can also help, by the way. I think industry can help push us along with good ideas. I mentioned the digital acquisition, being able to do a lot of cost performance trades, where we want to hit the knee in the curve, where if I add a little bit of cost, I expect a bump up in performance. Eventually, you add costs, and the bump up is, the juice ain't worth the squeeze, as they say.
Yes, sir.
So in this case, I would say that the same thing applies. I think if there's a good case there where we can say, that's worth doing for environmental reasons, we would be very open to it. This administration's got a huge focus on it. That is being felt.
Yes, sir.
I mentioned the simulators. That's another reason why we would want to push more work towards there.
Right.
We need to make our engines much more efficient. I don't think there's a surprise there either. So thank you.
And to build on that,
Yeah.
I know we're almost out of time. How many more questions do we have in the queue, sir?
Oh, we got 3 or 4, but that's okay. You're good.
Knowing that climate change
Yep.
and knowing that clean energy and knowing that resilience will be such an important issue for this administration, right? How, just generically in a nutshell, not being definitive, how would you anticipate, given the amount of fuel the Air Force uses per year, how would you anticipate that mandate would come? Would it come as a requirement? How would it flow
Yeah.
down? Where would it really, from the Air Force as a whole?
Yeah.
How would we, what should we be expecting as this thing emerges? And I apologize for calling it this thing. I'm
that's
sorry,
an
sir.
open-ended question. I couldn't even begin to guess how that could come down. It could actually come down as a hard requirement,
Yes, sir.
right? Or it could come down as a query for options, right? Hey, what options could we do if we wanted to do this? So it could come down a number of ways. The fuel's a large driver for the United States Air Force. There's no doubt about that. So I know I'm not answering your question very well, but we're in the nascent stages of that. So I'm not exactly sure how it's going to come down.
I know I was running into the minefield wildly
That's okay.
there, sir. Yes,
That's
sir.
all right.
Let's go back. Thank you very much. I understand that Mr. Baum is now available with Elbit. Mr. Baum.
And while we're waiting for him, the dumb question, to kind of put the rubber to the road,
Yeah.
right? I know when you talk publicly about like GBSD, you always gravitate, you always bring up the digital sandbox. I've heard you say the same thing about the T7, and obviously this is going to be the crux of NGAD, right? When you go out to these contractor plants, what is it, without being specific to a contractor, what is it you're seeing there that's just so attractive?
Oh boy. I'm not going to answer that because one of the things that we're trying to do, Jim, is be very careful to not, I'll call spill. I don't want to spill from one vendor to another. I definitely see differences.
Yes, sir.
You see different strengths and weaknesses, but it would just be inappropriate for me to do that.
Technical leveling, but is
Yeah,
everybody?
I don't want to. You just
But is everybody? Do you believe everybody's jumping into the swimming pool
I think
with you?
everybody is on board.
Yes, sir.
I think others are further along in the journey. But I think everybody, by the way, the Department of the Air Force is, as I mentioned, on a journey too, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
we've got folks that still think these are abstract terms. I'm hoping the presentation I showed you, it's not abstract, it's actually
Yes,
being
sir.
done by commercial industry all the time. But they're getting that. I think the more that we repeat the message and then we put it in solicitations, they will quickly understand it. T7 was not born this way, right? So when we did the T7 source selection, we weren't talking about this at that time. Future source selections we will. So it's a very different different world. The key though, as I mentioned, is getting our workforce trained. It's not enough. I mean, I don't actually do the work anymore, Jim. So we need to get the folks that are
Right.
doing the field level acquisition work to embrace it and be trained in it.
Well
Excellent.
spoken.
Before, just to jump in,
Yeah.
can you give us a status on KC-46? Have we gotten past the initial problems? Where do you see it going, and what's the end game?
I have, so KC-46 is a combat tanker, and it's got a huge bright future in front of it. It does way more than just pass fuel. It actually is able to pass fuel, but it is in a limited envelope. What
Right.
we're doing right now through the Remote Vision System 2.0
Yes, sir.
redesign is expanding that envelope. It's not where it needs to be. We know that.
Yes,
You
sir.
see, with the putting ABMS on CR1, Capability Release 1 on the KC-46 tells you where we think the future of that platform is.
Yes, sir.
And so it's very, very capable. In terms of the deficiency review or reports that are out there, one being the remote vision system, the design of that, Ms. Costello gets very frequent updates on it through Ms. Corrette. We're pretty happy with where it's at. We're coming up on what we call the preliminary design review, which I talked about in the other room.
Yes, sir.
That's coming up very soon. It's going to be event-based. It's not time-based. So we will not
Okay.
we will not proceed to it. It is not using the model that I discussed earlier.
Right.
So we will not proceed to it until we're absolutely ready.
Yes, sir.
That and the boom are probably the two DRs that are of most concern. Both of them are progressing well, and we'll start fielding both of those fixes about the same time.
Yes, sir. And I think if it's okay, sir, I burned up every moment of time that we have in your entire schedule. I killed it all, sir.
Yeah.
Is there any last, just the last 30 seconds, combat power in terms of the discussion to the wheat farmer in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
What's the message for the wheat farmer as to what the Air Force really brings to the combat power in terms of deterring the potential China fight?
Yeah, what the Air Force does, and I'll speak mostly from an acquisition lane, which is my lane.
Yes, sir.
So General Brown is trying to create multiple dilemmas for the enemy. We want to make sure we have a credible deterrence, such that if we have to fight, we will fight. So we are prepared to fight. So I would not want the person in Oklahoma to think that we're just, our plan is deterrence. Our plan is not deterrence. Our plan is to be ready to fight. We're hoping that, not hoping, hope's not a strategy, but our plan is by delivering a lot more material at a lot higher rate, that not only is General Brown able to create multiple dilemmas for the enemy during operations, we want to create multiple dilemmas in the material domain.
Yes, sir.
So that when they see all the stuff that we're fielding and all the stuff that we've got going on,
Yes, sir.
it does actually deter.
Yes, sir.
That's the secret sauce. And so I consider myself a warfighter. I don't get shot at, but I
Right.
consider myself an acquisition warfighter.
Yes, sir.
And so our job is to create dilemmas in the material domain.
Yes, sir.
So that General Brown can create dilemmas in the operational domain.
Yes, sir. Well spoken, sir.
Thanks.
I smell NGAD in there too, sir. Well done, sir. We'll kick off with General Hayden at literally about 30 seconds.